Dun, 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 dun. Do we still even have the theme song to start the show? Does it start? I haven't watched one of our BDEs.
I haven't.
I have your theme.
I've watched 2 today. I didn't.
All right,
I don't
Mike's
remember.
got to be close to the mouth, or Jacob yells at us. So you try to keep it a fist.
My earworm for podcast themes is always Chuck Yates Needs a Job.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I want to get a new song there, because I had the one song that sounded like The Cure, and the one I use now is the AC/DC one, and I've kind of been stuck on that for the 2 years, and I can't get rid of it. 90s Random's favorite thing is he and I went to New York together to go to Sankey's party, and he busted me because we're just walking around and I'm singing my own theme song. I think that was peak Chuck narcissism.
Do you have an AC/DC photobomb?
I don't. I've never met the AC/DC guys.
Apparently they're playing in Dallas in September, October.
They're doing the stadium tour. Yeah.
A friend of mine said clear your calendar. I've never seen AC/DC. It's one of
they're really good.
Yeah, I know.
Too.
It's one of the long time kind of gaps in my concert.
Yeah,
historical
definitely need
portfolio.
to go do that. So, significant upgrade to both Colin and Kirk. Lisa Hough, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for asking me.
This is so cool.
Very cool. I feel like I've made it to the big time.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Have you had her on?
No.
We have
That's
not.
the real big time.
No.
I watched them.
You should aspire to way more than that. But anyway, you're cool to join us. Kick us off, all things Bitcoin. Where are we in the world? Level set us there.
Yeah, it's January 13th. We are 1 year into the biggest financial institutions in the world launching their ETFs. It's been hugely successly. And that's probably an understatement.
Yeah, so BlackRock,
Fidelity,
right?
Did JP Morgan do one?
No.
They're still a holdout.
They're a holdout. Who did do them? Gosh, it's been 14 months. Like, no one's even talking about who's vying for these. ARK, I think Kathy Wood has one. I mean, I think BlackRock is the big daddy in the group. But I looked up some numbers. They've recorded their highest trading volume is 500 billion a day. They're about $37 billion of inflows. IBIT, which is BlackRock's, is $52 billion in assets in the first 11 months. I mean, it's the most successful ETF of all time.
Yeah.
Of assets under management, signaling a huge shift. I actually did some research a while back and I looked for it to bring today, but I wanted to know who owns the BlackRock ETF, right? Because at the beginning, when the ETFs launched, there was a statement that came out that most of the people were retail. It was just you and me. We were buying some Bitcoin for our portfolios. But actually, I think about 6 months ago, I did some research, and it's really the largest holders are Millennium. It's the Tudor funds. It's all the big hedge funds.
Yeah. Now, I could totally see this is going to be like the most anti-Bitcoin thing ever said, but it comes from somebody that loses his car keys every day. I don't know that I'd ever want to hold Bitcoin in my own wallet because, 16 passwords you have to remember somewhere? I would mess that up. So I get the appeal of an ETF. I get the appeal too from a Tudor or whatever, being able to move in and out of a regulated entity as opposed to a Bitcoin with a wallet. And if you didn't remember the 16 passwords and you lost money, there's some practical features of an ETF that makes it appealing.
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're looking to protect, right? If you're looking to protect your ability to transact and you can't use money in any other way, you're figuring out how to hold your own Bitcoin, right? Because I'm not buying coffee with the BlackRock ETF. And I was in Africa. We were talking about it right before Christmas. I was there for 2 weeks. I used Bitcoin almost every day that I was there.
Really?
So you can't spin the BlackRock ETF
Right.
in the coffee shop in Africa or Costa Rica or wherever. I mean, the point being that people all over the world use it as money. We use it because we think the number is going to go up, which is fine too.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I was out, the small town I live in, Richmond, Texas, we shut down Morton Street, which is in effect Main Street, 3 or 4 blocks. And, we'll do art fairs and we'll have old classic cars show up. It feels like we do that about once a quarter or so. And last time I was out there, one of the bakeries took Bitcoin.
Brilliant.
One of the art people that were selling their paintings took Bitcoin.
Brilliant.
It was pretty cool. Had the QR codes. So tell us more about Africa real quick.
Yeah, I went out there for the Africa Bitcoin conference. This was the 3rd year that they've done it. It's the first year that I've attended. It was huge, much larger than I thought. A couple thousand people, I think, were there, filled huge conference rooms in a beautiful hotel, the JW Marriott in Nairobi. And, we get really excited. We think people are building cool things in the US on the tech side. Really, you haven't even seen cool stuff until you've been to Africa to see what they're building. And again, because they need solutions. So one of the builders that was there, actually standing at the coffee shop, he had a ring on that looked like that Aura ring. And he just tapped the payment processor. He just tapped it. Boom. That was it. He paid in Bitcoin. And so I'm like, what is that? That's amazing. He's like, it's whatever. You can buy the ring off of, wherever. They're $10. But then I don't even know because I'm not technical, but essentially you can load Bitcoin onto this. And it is not energized. You're not plugging this thing in. It energizes when it touches the payment reader. But he came up with it because the country where he lives, most people don't carry a cell phone. And so he was thinking, well, if most people don't carry a cell phone and so they can't scan a QR code to use their Bitcoin, how could they store Bitcoin and carry it with them? Well, everybody can wear a ring. And so he made this thing.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, so maybe that doesn't sound like huge, but it really is, right? It's going to solve a problem for a few million people in a community.
So in that mechanism, where is the Bitcoin stored?
Well, Bitcoin always lives on the blockchain, right? So he has, I don't know what the process is of how, his name is Dread. I don't know what his process is. I'll find out and get back to you, but, or you should meet him. But he has somehow loaded the value onto this.
I mean, is it connected to something like River or?
No.
Is he custody at Guardian or just?
No.
He's got his own.
I wish I had dug into it, but there's a lot.
I mean, I would think as a ring, you'd want to load, kind of like a credit card, if you will, temporary credit card. You'd want to load $5 because if your ring got stolen, you obviously wouldn't want all
right.
Your
Well, I
Bitcoin
think that's
on.
exactly right. I think it's something like he has a, Bitcoin on like you're saying. I forget what those things are called.
Chip of some sort.
Right.
Yeah.
That he's loaded. But anyway, Africa Bitcoin Conference, Jack Dorsey was there. He sat in the front row every single day of the conference, like he always does. He attends the conference that's in Riga, Latvia. Same thing. And that was 4 days long. It was 2 days of Nostr, 2 days of Bitcoin. He sat in the front row all day, every day. I mean, focused on the presenter, which was amazing. He also paid for the Riga conference, and I'm sure he was a significant part of the Africa Bitcoin conference. But the point is, people came from all over Africa. Thousands of people came from all over Africa to talk about Bitcoin and things that they're building. And while I was there, I also got to go visit Gridless Bitcoin Miner that's based in Kenya. I got to go see one of their mines, which was basically on the side of a mountain connected to a hydroelectric facility. And the people that live in these huts on this side of the mountain had very little access to power before. The electricity provider had come in and set up this infrastructure, but he couldn't operate because he couldn't sell the power for really what it cost him to operate, right? So I don't know, for years, it just sort of sat there. He has now partnered with Gridless. Gridless is the buyer of first and last resort, basically. But now these houses all have power, and they have more stable power than in some cities in Africa because of the Bitcoin miner who's come in to, not only just be the underpinning, the financial security for the power provider, but it's a win literally all the way around.
So in effect, create a base load demand for power and get the assets up and running, and that allows them to run a wire to houses and stuff like that.
Right. But wait, there's more. So why I think this is all really cool, and then maybe we can tie this into what I focus a lot on, which is helping energy companies get their minds wrapped around the fact that Bitcoin mining is directly tied to our national security. Those folks in Africa, that mining operation, when Bitcoin is the underpinning for the world's financial system, which it will be inside of 10 years, I would say, you are going to have access to the transaction space, to the block space, right? You can't just own Bitcoin in the ETF, and I can't just own Bitcoin and have my transactions processed, right? You have to have a miner who is taking those transactions that can form those transactions and put them into a block. And so those folks in Africa will never be cut out from the global financial system. They will always have block space in which to transact, right? Unless their government co-ops it and does something else with it. But I mean, I don't see any of that happening. But here in the US, working with energy companies and specifically with guys that have, maybe we call it stranded gas, maybe it's just disadvantaged gas like Waha. And you tell them that let's set up a Bitcoin mining operator. It's accretive to you and it's operationally friendly. And oh, by the way, we need this. It's a matter of national security. Helping them connect the pieces is like, for me, just absolute nirvana. And, we talk a lot about grid instability, the threats to our grid, why we need to stabilize our grid, why all these new power sources would be great for our grids. That's great. But what if Russia, China, Iran attack our grids? We already have evidence that Iran has been here and has been at some of our big transformer sites. And so if our grid is attacked and all of our Bitcoin mining is on grid, we then, the US, looking out again several years, if we connected all of our Bitcoin miners to the grid and the grid goes down, we in essence would be locked out of the global financial system, much like we locked Russia out of SWIFT. So I know there was a lot there, but.
So taking it to the US energy companies, particularly the producers, as you point out, there's a lot of quasi-stranded to stranded gas or severely undervalued gas that would otherwise take advantage of what Chuck has been talking about for at least a year as his mantra, molecules to electrons.
Yeah.
And as I've said recently, it's a little surprising to me that this pivot by the producers, you've seen some early, fairly notable announcements on the part of Exxon and Diamondback saying we're open for business. But what's driving the inertia? Is it Is it regulatory? Is it political? Is it just a traditional energy mindset that, or is it another thing that I've thought about? There's been a lot of emissions reduction goals and targets set. Well, if I start adding a bunch of generation to my asset base off grid, then if it's natural gas fired, obviously I've got emissions that are added back. Is that part of the pushback or the inertia or kind of the slow to embrace what seems like a pretty obvious opportunity, just given the larger backdrop of what we think is coming in this wave of power demand related not only to Bitcoin, but also to high performance computing and AI. So what's the pushback or what's the reticence?
Well, I think it's the malware that is located in each person's brain, right? You have been told by people in the know, and I'm really being sarcastic, but you have been told by Elizabeth Warren and Jamie Dimon and Warren Buffett that Bitcoin is for terrorists. You have been told that for years. And that is a really hard narrative to shake. And I think that the launch of the ETFs, I mean, God bless Larry Fink for really outing his negligence in looking at Bitcoin carefully. I mean, he literally said, I've now looked at this again and I've changed my mind. Bitcoin is hope, right? And they launched their ETF and it's the most successful ETF of all time. So, I mean, maybe he had an incentive to say these things, fine. But it's a little bit of that. It's also, when we have conversations with energy companies and they're, if they humor me and they'll want to model this out, okay, well, what does this look like going forward? What's hard, right? Because two factors. I mean, as Dan Morrison frequently says, producers are the ultimate optimists, right? They always think price is going higher. But there's also no Bitcoin forward curve of any length. And so it's, if you think that natural gas prices are going to continue to rise and you're really not sure that Bitcoin's even going to survive, and certainly there's no forward curve that shows it up and to the right that anybody trusts, and certainly no one's trading it. I mean, I think you can trade 3 years, but it's not like nat gas where we could trade a 10-year strip. I mean, when I was trading, we traded 10 years. That wasn't.
Yeah, I think on the NYMEX, you're allowed the next 6 months. And then you're right, 2 years after that in December that you can lock in Bitcoin on. So you can't really hedge it usually. I think, another interesting thing that I've heard, because we had this specific issue come up. Colin and I went and met with one of the large E&P companies, and they go, what happens with our land and with our royalty owners? We start mining Bitcoin. How do we handle natural gas? They're not paying for their share of, the mining equipment, et cetera. So I don't think they should get profits off it. What do you do? And there's at least been some work done by folks where you sell at whatever the market rate is of natural gas. There's not a good standard there that's set. So you do get sued if you have a big, sophisticated landowner, royalty holder there. But I think we're at least starting to coalesce around different ways of handling that seem to work. But that was a big frustration early on.
But how would you get paid if you had cattle there? If you were raising cattle on top of land where there's production under the surface? I don't know, but certainly we've.
Yeah, it's the you told the landowner they get a quarter of the revenue, and then you're taking their natural gas and saying it's worthless, and you're making something out of it. Do they get a quarter of that profit? You as the E&P company don't want to do that because you're like, hey, I paid for a bunch of miners here that comes in. So I don't know that it's necessary. The key is there wasn't really a clear path to that. But I think what it's coalescing around is We have a subsidiary. We take the market price of whatever we could get if we sold it into the pipeline. We sell it at that rate to the subsidiary, and the subsidiary makes whatever. The other thing I think about Bitcoin mining from E&P companies, you're right. It's just kind of the stodgy mindset of why would we do this, which is weird because I've always felt like the E&P business is the most entrepreneurial folks on the planet out there. The other thing that kind of pops up is if you look at mining, it's truly what's interesting about it is there are no barriers to entry. So the profitability of mining it's really hard to model out. Mining this is going to be profitable for me all in
Right.
on the CapEx. Now it's sort of self-correcting in that equipment prices do trade with Bitcoin prices and the like, but the mining piece of Bitcoin was designed to not be wildly profitable because it didn't want to suck the money out of the system. That being said, at least in the whole time I've looked at it, there's never been a point if you set up the computers where you would ever choose to not mine. You always get more on a unit price for your natural gas if you're mining. Now, it may not pay back the money you spent on the computers, but every E&P company runs their natural gas through a gas processing plant and makes the choice every day. Do we leave, do we strip out ethane or do we reject the ethane?
Right.
What do we do? How do we best sell it? And you ought to be doing that with your natural gas.
The revaluation of natural gas and some basic Bitcoin versus pipeline sales that I've seen, you've got a lot of room for error because the multiples above what we're seeing at there is such a thing anymore as normalized prices. I don't believe there ever was, is quite large. And so given kind of the risk-seeking nature of the industry that we grew up in, this seems to be kind of a large or a target-rich area and I think that's what Diamondback was talking about is, look, we're giving away natural gas, which we mostly produce incidentally with oil through associated gas. And I think they've led on some of the more progressive pronouncements among the industry in various ways, the SMRs, et cetera. But yeah, I think getting over that hump, that stodgy mindset hump it's taken longer than I thought it would, just given how big the arbitrage between the molecule and the electron converted molecule is from a value and a pricing standpoint.
It's changing though. I mean, it's 2025. In the last 4 years that I've been sitting down with energy companies and having this conversation, it is drastically different today than it was 4 years ago.
But who's actually doing stuff?
Well,
at scale.
I mean, I don't think that the energy companies have fully embraced it. We know that Hillcorp has a pilot program in Alaska. I wouldn't be surprised if there were others that are just unannounced. But
rumors are Conoco.
Right. Your industry, first of all, a couple of things. You have been talking about this and energy flourishing, that concept at Empower for at least 3 years, 4 years maybe.
Yeah.
Right. At your first Empower, there was a panel on energy flourishing, energy security. Yeah. So you guys have been talking about it for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I mean, that party that we were at last month, we were all at last month with the governor of Alaska, there was discussion of Bitcoin mining, and it wasn't that it's for terrorists. That's really new because I go to a lot of cocktail parties and I speak at YPO events, and it used to be, oh, but isn't the government going to shut it down? No one ever says that anymore, right? People are really trying to dig into it. bankers are trying to dig into it. Private equity groups are trying to dig into it, especially the private equity groups, because when you can demonstrate to them that you can make their asset more valuable in a sale, like by adding a lot, by just a small portion of your power, do Bitcoin mining, they're going to pay you this much a year. That's going to be 1 million or 4 million a year. Oh, this asset trades on an 8 multiple, so that's $32 million in a sale of an asset, right? Like, it starts their brains a turning.
Yeah.
Because they're not long-term
It's even more
holders.
compelling when the governor who's leaning into it is a full 6'9".
Yeah.
Okay, he was tall, right?
Yeah.
He's a giant.
No, and we've talked about Canada's making a little noise around it. Alaska certainly is leaning into it. There's just natural advantages of having a huge endowment of natural gas, most of it stranded. Oh, and by the way, you're in a much more advantageous climate for the operation of machines, compressors, turbines. So they get it.
Yeah. We're having a conference in Alaska over 4th of July, a Bitcoin conference. Somehow I've gotten unofficially put on the planning committee. And I mentioned it to the governor when we met him, and he was enthusiastic. In fact, I need to speak to him. I need his contact info from somebody out there because he asked me to come speak at their energy conference in June. And I said, yes, but I don't know anything about it and I don't know how to find him. I hear it's very difficult to go through their website. Anyway, states should be very enthusiastic about this. And, when I run the world, I would give tax incentives to the energy companies for mining Bitcoin. Again, because it's a matter of national security. We have to be forward thinking with Bitcoin. It's fine to think of it as an asset, and it's done so well. The ETFs are record numbers. That's fine. But it's a much more strategic asset than just from a financial standpoint.
The value of global assets today, I think, is roughly $900 trillion.
$900 trillion.
And Bitcoin is at $2 trillion.
I mean, it's 90,000. So 1.8 trillion, 1.9 trillion, 2 trillion.
Yeah. So
it's nothing.
With a
still has a T in front of it.
But in terms of
that's
participation in the portfolio of global asset value, the notion that it gets to 2 to 3% is not out of the realm of historical precedent.
Okay, but right. And we've done this math a couple of times, which, for people that love price predictions, 900 trillion of total global wealth. Let's say that Bitcoin becomes a 5% allocation, right? So like jewelry, commodities, fine art, right? Bitcoin, let's say it becomes a 5% allocation. That would be $45 trillion divided by the number of Bitcoin.
Assuming a static 900 trillion
right.
as a base.
That's a little more than $2 million of Bitcoin. And so, I've been using this example for 2 years or 3 years, this very example. And someone asked me a long time ago, when will this happen? Like, what will set this off? And what I think the biggest signal is, and again, no one is talking about it, very few people are talking about it, is that, when Russia starts using Bitcoin for global exchange of value for their natural resources, right, it will force the hand of everyone else to use it. And when we kicked them off SWIFT and wouldn't let them sell natural gas into the dollarized world, right, and they're the second largest producer after the United States, they set up Bitcoin mining. And they have said in 2023, they mined 1 out of every 5 Bitcoin. So think of the hash rate that's coming out of Russia, the physical mining that's coming out of Russia. We now know that they're using Bitcoin in trade. And when I look at the picture of the 38 countries that stood together and took that BRICS photo in front of all those flags, I mean, to me, that's a pretty giant FU to the United States. And that concerns me greatly. And that's why I've long said that I've believed Elizabeth Warren is the biggest threat to national security that we have, not Putin, because she has so knocked the reputation of, an asset and a tool that we should be using to protect our financial sovereignty.
Yeah, and I think some of the, maybe the indirect lawfare, Mark Andreessen spoke about it pretty recently, that, Andreessen Horowitz is the largest investor in crypto startups, and they've seen a number of their entrepreneurs get debanked. That's a real acute threat.
Oh, I know. I worked for Caitlin Long at Custodia Bank, right? And many of the people that would call us to inquire about banking had been debanked. We had one customer who had been debanked by 8 banks. And they're in a Bitcoin adjacent business. They're not Bitcoin miners. They're actually a software company.
Well, and the craziest thing about all this is the leading currency for illegal activity in the world is the US dollar.
Right.
It's cash. It's not even close, and so.
So I know we want to get to a pretty significant deal, but it's been over a year and a half ago. I called them the 180s, or all these players that are reversing course. Like we've seen GFANZ come unraveled, Net Zero Alliance. I think Arjun cheered goodbye and good riddance to GFANZ, I think on the heels of JP Morgan being the last to leave the Net Zero Alliance in the parade of U.S. private banks that were saying we're not going to be beholden to this singular climate carbon driven agenda. And so do you think we continue to see that type of rollback or reversal that then accelerates or lifts the national security priority for Bitcoin, crypto, and everything else that's computing and AI related, politically, where we actually make significant progress, given the change in administration?
I think there are
4 years isn't a long time.
Right. Very few people are talking about the true national security implication of it. Very few people. And Bitcoin mining, just on the scale of what we're getting ready to talk about, is the demand from data centers. Like Goldman, in their report that they published in April, they specifically say this does not include Bitcoin mining because it's so insignificant, right? The data center demand dwarfs anything Bitcoin mining will do. 1% to 99%. I don't know what it is, but the data centers are the whole story of power demand. And you really need to see national security and power demand as 2 separate issues. Yes, we want our grids to be strong, but then what happens if our grid is attacked?
Right.
And that is a huge, real threat.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm about halfway or 2/3 of the way through Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan, and he's doing his mea culpa and he did spend $500 million giving money to Democratic causes to round up votes and the like. That being said, and I can't believe I did this. Maybe it was because I was working out and I was exhausted, but I was almost feeling sympathetic for him. He's talking about government officials calling and yelling at his people. And, I felt somewhat sympathetic to him saying, hey, we were deferring to the government a little bit. This was a health crisis, and you think the government's gonna tell you this, but then when he says, all I want to do is write software code and build products that are cool and stuff, and so I'm deferring to people. We get these fact checkers in, and he's like, lo and behold, I looked up and it was things like, everybody that's sick, whether it's COVID or not, should go outside and get some sunlight. We all know that. We all know you should get vitamin C. I mean, Linus Pauling won the Nobel Prize for that. And so I'm actually becoming somewhat sympathetic to, which I probably shouldn't be. I should be more cynical. But the social media companies, the banks that all had to join this, I mean, you've literally had to do this to protect your franchises or else be canceled.
And the only one in real time when he realized what was going on that blew the whistle on all of it was Elon.
Yeah.
Right.
When he bought Twitter.
Right.
Yeah.
So my question is, in the example that Zuckerberg gave about, okay, they're asking them to take down fact-based information about vaccine side effects.
Yeah. That's scary.
That's the red line, right?
Yeah.
And, he went on to further explain how, the weaponization of what the U.S. government wanted via the sanctions and the fines that they faced, and particularly European companies. I think he said U.S. tech companies have been fined $30 billion over the last 10 or 20 years, which is a shocking number. And instead of getting defended by the U.S. government, we want the U.S. to win. We want U.S. tech companies certainly to win. Instead, there's an extension of that
kind of gang
threat
on.
That threat mechanism. And so, you're at a crossroads, I think, morally.
But again, people don't think for themselves, right? And I don't feel in the slightest bit any fondness towards Zuckerberg. I mean, I'm proud of him that he came out and admitted everything he's admitted. But dude, you lead one of the largest companies. Grow a pair. Be a leader.
You're worth billions. You could actually do it.
Elon goes on TV and says, you can go F yourself to all the advertisers. Jack Dorsey has probably more eloquently said the same things. The government works for us.
Yeah.
They work for us.
No, it's
and if we continue to just bow to, you can't say this, you can't say that, your company can't do this. I'm sorry, are we now China?
No, I mean, it's scary level 1984 type stuff that was going on, that Zuckerberg was recounting, that the Twitter files were recounting. I mean, it was really bad. And, the thing I don't like is it's getting portrayed as, oh, okay, people are just sucking up to Trump. I think this is, in effect, people had, a foot taken off their neck, and now they're able to actually say stuff. So I don't feel like it's sucking up to Trump necessarily.
I think it's opportunistic, cynically. And you've seen the parade of those who were in the
Mar-a-Lago.
Dinners. Before that parade, and the last 4 years were going along quietly. That all of a sudden, kind of reading the tea leaves and seeing the winds change. The question is this pivot back to mitigating and reducing censorship? Is it permanent? What's the battle that's going to surely unfold?
Right.
I've read a lot of critique of the Zuckerberg Rogan podcast as well, and there's vehement opposition still that this is mostly driven and hugely funded by kind of a right wing body of thought and kind of political power move. So, we'll see. I grew up in the industry as a research analyst, or at least half my career, and always, tend to read things with as independent and an objective. And if something really is off or seems to be a complete misstatement of fact, then you think about it more in an objective analytical way. But I still adhere to the adage that the cure for bad speech is more, not less.
Well, it's been amazing, the transformation, because I mean, if you think about what happened, like in the COVID situation, you basically, the only way to use an emergency vaccine is to have no other therapeutic cures. So things that could help, vitamin C, vitamin D, ivermectin, whatever, any sort of evidence that showed that any of those, even if they marginally helped, were obviously, censored. And it's just phenomenal, because I never would have thought liberal America would say rich people should get the benefit of things and poor people shouldn't, because that's in effect what it had. I mean, Joe Rogan, when he got COVID, got to go to the best doctors on the planet, and they recommended ivermectin. I think they put him on the Z-Pack and the magnesium and all the stuff you did. And he had a very, wound up having a mild case of it. And in effect, poor people were denied that. So it's.
I mean, why were the rates of severity and infection so low in Africa?
Yeah.
Was they've been using things like ivermectin as a prophylaxis in low dose all their lives.
Yeah. The chloroquine and.
Right. Yeah. So anyway. So getting back to
get back to the big deal.
Energy is, I think, central to the national security framework that you've been talking about and immersed in. And as part of what we have coming, and I think making the grid more robust, stabilizing the grid, and certainly making it capable of meeting this, I don't know if it's a hockey stick, but we didn't see commercial and industrial and residential power demand grow for a long time. And now we're facing, 5% growth rates is a huge, huge number. And we've seen a bit of a, at least mindset renaissance in nuclear. And so you have the biggest nuclear fleet operator in Constellation, 87% of their pre-Calpine portfolio was nuclear generation, say, and they're the ones that also are operating the restart of 3 Mile Island Unit 1 in the deal with Microsoft. Expectation is that will get energized sometime in 2028. I'll take the over on that number, just based on my amateur listening of the first NRC hearing a few weeks ago. But so they go out and make a big splash and portfolio grab for one of the largest gas-fired fleets available in Calpine. So what does that say?
So the interesting things for me for the deal are, number one, and I haven't seen an exact map, but basically this is putting Constellation into Texas and California, where Calpine had assets. So you're going to, in effect, the fast-growing markets. So I thought that was a pretty interesting take. The other interesting thing I'd like to find out, and hopefully it will come out over time, who else bid on Calpine? Did we have any E&P companies bid? Did Exxon make a bid? Did Chevron make a bid? That would be interesting to see, just in terms of reading the tea leaves, of looking out over the next 5 years of how the industry is going to transform. Who else was bidding on Calpine?
Well,
that would be interesting.
I mean, just, my pedestrian opinion. I mean, I am surprised that private equity isn't a bigger part of this market. I mean, we know locally that they're bidding on some gas processing plants and the like. But again, if we were really thinking long term, the BlackRocks of the world would be buying these assets because they are the ones who are going to be so heavily reliant on the end product, right? They need the power. And in the case of, Bitcoin, which they probably really don't care a whole lot about other than to sell their ETF. But I mean, you're going to need miners with physical presence so that you can have block space.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a transformational leap for miners when you actually have balance sheets. You can actually run like a real business. We have equity, we have debt, we can do payables in 30 days, that sort of stuff. I think the Calpine deal at 25, to $30 billion, that's just a big bite for private equity. So they might have bid on it, but you're not going to get a stretch bid that a public company like Constellation can stretch and do.
I still don't think that we're valuing generation assets for what their real value is, right? Like to your point, I think you said earlier, or maybe you said it on a podcast, like need power yesterday.
Yeah.
This whole let's build and it'll be ready in 2 years or 3 years, the Texas Energy Fund, like that's all great. But we are so stretched for power today.
I need assets today that are spinning and generating electrons.
Right.
And because I always go back to kind of the backlog of, I think it's Pinnacle West. They have 4 gigawatts in their active backlog with another 10 behind it that they haven't even evaluated or considered. That's just one example. The thing that struck me immediately, and I've been probably too one-dimensional thinking about this, is that, all the excitement around reacceleration of nuclear, look at the timelines. We're 5 to a restart of a mothballed facility. And we saw with Susquehanna and Amazon some, what are those called, interconnect agreement disputes where FERC came in and agreed with the plaintiff. And so there are going to be fits and starts along just an inherently protracted timeline. We had Bob Kuntz on several months ago just talking about nuclear reality. Bob was
I know him.
Sub-commander.
Yeah, I like him so much. Yeah.
He's a maxi.
Yeah, I like him so much.
And so my first reaction was, oh, well, they're filling the gap now. And that points almost singularly to natural gas because the reliability, availability, and the uptime and the scalability is really ready-made. And we've got tons of the stuff under our feet, which is cheap as hell. And so, it's not coincidental that the banks and the tech companies are saying, we're going to step back from things like Net Zero Alliance and building these kind of grand visions of solar arrays powering our data centers. We need to kind of not hang ourselves here. And there are trillions of dollars of opportunities at all points in the value chain, from banking to data center developer to oil and gas producer, right? To take advantage of what's coming, because I think we all agree that this is a durable power growth super cycle, as Arjun described in the Substack that he published this weekend. And he's not loose with that term, but I think there is a kind of shift in the posture on convenience and opportunity that is unfolding here.
Right. But again, to really draw out the national security angle of a data center or AI, yes, we need power. Yes, we need to stabilize our grid. yes, everyone understands that it's 6x or 10x the amount of power required for a ChatGPT search than a Google search, right? It's an intense amount of power draw for these tools that we're using in all sorts of applications. But we have to have these in order to create the next layer of technology that we can't even imagine what will be, right? We're not building power for AI's sake. We're building it or building power for AI and these other tools in hopes that we can solve some of the world's actual problems.
Well, your gridless and remote Kenya example is a good example, I think, of the foundational driver here, which is playing out in other forms of energy, but particularly in power, is there is a self-preservation and self-interest instinct that is going to, pardon the pun, trump everything when push comes to shove. And that is, I'm looking for survival first and then improving my and my family's well-being and standard of living. That's what
we went through.
That's what everybody outside of the lucky 1 billion club is going to drive. And there's just that ambient pressure to make this happen.
Well, and we, in effect, ceded our manufacturing capability to the rest of the world, and we go through a pandemic and we can't get toilet paper. I think we all kind of learned our lesson there. And the next big one we're going to face is if we allow all the AI data centers to be built outside the United States of America, that's going to be fucked up. That's going to be like really bad.
You just reminded me of a funny tweet I saw from Chris Martz this weekend talking about the winter storm. He lives in Virginia. He said, what is it with winter storms? You go to the grocery store and everybody's wiped out the eggs in the milk aisle.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Chris is hysterical. But no, I mean, the AI infrastructure has to happen here. It's a national security imperative. And if we don't do things like build power lines here, cut the regulations and the red tape to be able to get generation built, I mean, we are doing our kids as big a disservice as we are leaving them all this debt. Is
there anything in the collection of the rumored blitz of executive orders? I think I've heard 100 on day one, starting next week, Monday, week from now, that, most people think about, okay, we have this big headline grabbing OCS ban of 625 million acres, the LNG pause, et cetera. Is there anything IRA related that, might be more subtle that we should be looking for that would be really impactful from this Bitcoin national security issue that needs addressing now?
So I've started really looking into how likely would a strategic Bitcoin reserve be? There's maybe people outside of Bitcoin don't care about it. We talk about it a lot. And that prompted me to look at what's the history of the strategic petroleum reserve, which I won't pressure you here, but when I ask most people, when do you think that started? They think it started when we had kind of the OPEC crisis, right? That was in the 70s and the 80s. We were really feeling intense pressure.
Yeah, we had the fuel lines and you could only buy gasoline on Tuesdays
Correct.
or Mondays. And yeah.
Would it surprise you to know that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve really was kicked off during the Spanish-American War? And what happened was we were fighting Spanish-American War, and I'm looking at my notes, but American ships were 45 miles away at a recoaling station during the brunt of this battle at sea. And there had been talk in Britain and in the United States, like, we need to turn our battleships into oil-fired, ships, because they were all fired with coal. And it wasn't until 1910 that the president was like, we need to do this and we need to create a strategic petroleum reserve. And I think those first 3 were in Texas. Right. So it's always this intense pain point that makes us change. Like I'm no expert on the big inch, little inch pipelines, right? Where we basically took, here's another fun fact. During World War II, 6 billion out of the 8 billion barrels of oil that were required by the Allied forces came from the United States. We actually laid undersea cables in 1944 under the English Channel from Britain to France to supply oil. Like, we have been doing this a really long time, yet we all think, when we think oil crisis, it's like the 70s. Really, when you dig into it, it's had strategic implications since the Spanish-American War. Like, we need to be forward thinking about Bitcoin and hash rate. So, whether we put it as a treasury asset for the US, I mean, I think that would be great because I think the value will rise. It will be $2.14 million in a matter of years, and maybe we pay off our debt. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an economics expert, right? But we do need hash rate here in the United States. We need to be forward looking about what we're really trying to accomplish.
Haven't there been a couple of states that have established, which are those states?
I think there are 12 or 11 or 12. I mean, the latest last week was North Dakota and New Hampshire put forth, like, we want to create a, state strategic reserve of Bitcoin. It's really smart.
Well, and we haven't even touched
the Granite State, where there is no reserves underground, and then North Dakota.
Well, we haven't even touched on it. We could go another whole hour on this. Is at the end of the day, the infrastructure being built on top of the Bitcoin network, Lightning, tick on down the list of all these applications we're building off, are going to be phenomenal for economic growth. And so if we're not protecting the Bitcoin network by having miners in the United States, that's another bad thing.
And that is exactly right. See, you're tying the bow on it because, again, looking back to the last war that we fought, which is what everyone has in their mind when they think about, oh, we'll go to war, we'll just blow these people up. It's like the whole Saving Private Ryan or whatever hero image you have. Like, first of all, we don't even have those kids to go fight this war. Like the 22-year-old boys that I see, I'm not sending anywhere. But our protection was the ocean, right? Our protection from our enemies has always been the ocean. Well, we don't have that anymore. And so in order to protect ourselves, we need the best technology. Yeah. We need the strongest economy, right? National security is 3 things. It's a strong economy, big military, and your foreign relations. Like 3 critical aspects of national security. And yet we just want to talk about ESG and DEI and whatever the distraction du jour is. We've got to stop.
Yeah, and I'll invoke is on another subject, the difference between physical and financial oil trading, Rory Johnston, who publishes a great Substack called The Commodity Context. I got that right. I gave him attribution for the Crude Chronicles, and he corrected me. But he quipped that ones and zeros travel a lot faster than barrels and molecules.
Yeah.
So we've basically eliminated the moat that is the oceans, is I think your point, to put it simplistically.
Oh, yeah.
But Churchill knew that in 1941, why there was so much desire and urgency to get the U.S. involved. So
anyway,
history does repeat itself.
Yes, it does. Lisa, this has been so cool that you joined us.
Thanks for having me.
Glad we didn't have to follow the run of show.
Yeah, standing invite
Thank
to come back anytime. How do people reach you?
Find me on my website, lisahough.io. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I write every day on LinkedIn about these topics. And I do reply to every LinkedIn message that I get, unless it's like, how's your trading going? And then I delete it. But if you genuinely want to have a conversation about energy, national security, Bitcoin mining, like hit me up. I'd love to.
Cool. All righty. If you enjoyed this week's show, please share it with a friend, like it, give us comments. Remember that I'm very sensitive. So if you're going to criticize Mark, not me. We'll see you next week.